Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. That's ziprecruiter.com/zip. ziprecruiter.com/zip.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Lies, exploitation, and the American dream turned nightmare. This is Big Sugar, a deep dive into the inner workings of the sugar industry. I'm Celeste Headley, and in a new podcast, I'm investigating a true crime story like no other about the men who risked their lives to cut sugarcane. In Big Sugar from iHeartMedia, Imagine Audio, and the teams at Weekday Fun and Novel, I'll unravel a decades-long fight to get justice.
If they were right, then these workers were owed tens of millions of dollars in extra wages.
Listen to Big Sugar wherever you get your podcasts.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And today I'm looking at a particular kind of narrative, really. One where we don't really give it enough credit, even though it's immensely important and it shapes the world around us in most kind of Western countries. Now, the way in which the idea of propaganda is taught when we are in most Western countries at school is that it's synonymous with 20th century dictatorships, Nazism, Soviet communism, and the idea again is that the explanation for fascism, the explanation for people voting for Adolf Hitler or Mussolini and transitioning from, and this is a gross oversimplification, and obviously the facts are a very different story, but choosing to abandon the wonders of liberal democracy for totalitarianism must be explicable by propaganda. Simply the Nazi control of Nazi manipulation of mass media, of radio and print media meant that people came to believe things that ordinarily they wouldn't believe, and transitioned to this kind of slave-like state. This is I'm talking in hyperbole, but for much of the post-war era, the explanation Nazism at a kind of a high school level sort of comes down to this. That there is a sort of a brainwashing, and the explanation for Soviet communism is equally kind of made in this way. Obviously, school teaching is much more nuanced these days, and I know many fantastic practitioners that explain the popularity of Nazism up until January 1933 in far more nuanced terms. But what we generally do and still do is imagine that Western society, being sort of notionally liberal and notionally democratic, is somehow exempt from propaganda. But if that is so, what explains in the United States of America and in Great Britain the mass transition of attitudes and values over time? What explains the transition from kind of broadly social democratic outlooks, a broad social democratic consensus amongst most working class people at the height of the New Deal era in America and the welfare state era in Great Britain, to kind of not a kind of an absolute majority of the population, but a significant minority abandoning New Deal and welfare state kind of nostrums and values and embracing neoliberalism. Well, part of it can be explained by the crises that both the New Deal, long after the Second World War, by the 60s and the 70s, the crises that the New Deal was encountering and the crises that the welfare state encountered in the 1970s, mostly the result of these exogenous shocks, these things like oil shocks. Part of it can be explained by social mobility and demographic change and new ideas that were emerging throughout the 20th century of individualism and kind of the kind of acquisitive individualism that was born of a number of decades of improved living standards, which were largely the product of social welfare and social democracy. But some of it can be explained via propaganda. So the means by which propaganda kind of develops within democratic societies at a kind of an ideas level is what I really want to explore today. And again, it's hugely underexplored, but the kind of the role of the think tank and the role of the well-funded, elite-funded institute, things like the Heritage Foundation or the Cato Institute in America, or the the various kind of fellow travellers in the UK, the Institute for Economic Affairs being the chief one in Great Britain, but there are many others. What do these institutions seek to do? Well, during the 1940s, it was the view of Friedrich Hayek, and then later of Milton Friedman and those like them, that the ideas that neoliberal ideas, the ideas of the whittled down state, the application of market forces to virtually everything, that these ideas would be marginalized during the New Deal era, but patience and they, fair play to the neoliberals, they were incredibly patient. patience would be required, and that when the crises happened, it was about what ideas were lying around that could be used. When the um, when the 1970s, the two oil shocks of the 1970s bring the Western world to its knees. When in Great Britain, for example, trade union militancy, as a result of price rises, and the kind of the general sense of malaise and of crisis, caused faith in the welfare state era to really fall into decline amongst the public. Commentators, who were many of whom naturally inclined towards more right-wing free market and therefore socially reactionary positions, look around for solutions. And it's where you have think tanks going, well, here's what the problem is. Here's where it all went wrong. We went down this route, and that resulted in slow motion disaster. And what we need to do to revitalize the economy is this kind of version of economic shock therapy. We need to, in Britain, the answer was to rein in the money supply. And you rein in the money supply by cutting government spending, and you rein in the money supply by whacking up interest rates, which suck money out of society in terms of debt repayment. And as you do that, it rewards an investor class and it depletes the productive economy, thus giving you the kind of the mass unemployment sort of economic hellscape that Margaret Thatcher created from 1979 into the mid 1980s, and it's only by 1987 when they realised that this hasn't worked, and the chief nemesis of the neoliberals is the monetarists at the time. Monetarism was just simply a kind of a front name for neoliberalism in general. The key nemesis is inflation. By the time you get to 1987, it's recognised that not only has inflation not really been slain, but mass unemployment, that was the price that was to be paid to bring inflation down, that hasn't been brought down either. And in the later 1980s, Tory Chancellor Nigel Lawson simply says, well, let's let the good times roll, and creates various sort of housing and asset booms, which resulting in crisis later on. Anyway, that's slightly aside. So I just want to talk about think tanks today, and I'm looking in more at America. I have talked about this and Great Britain before, but I just want to talk about America and dive into Gary Gerson's book, The Rise and Fall of the Neoliberal Era. Gary Gerson writes, the neoliberal ascent began innocuously enough. In 1971, Lewis Powell, then a successful corporate lawyer in Virginia, issued a call to arms in the form of a private memo he had sent to the head of the US Chamber of Commerce. Entitled The Attack on the Free Enterprise System, the memo described as tyranny the comprehensive regulatory edifice that the New Deal order had built to manage capital, labor, finance, retirement, poverty, and the environment. We in America already have moved very far indeed towards some aspects of state socialism, Powell lamented. The experience of the socialist and totalitarian states demonstrates, he continued, that the contraction and denial of economic freedom is followed inevitably by governmental restrictions on other cherished rights. The failure of the natural defenders of economic freedom in America, especially in the business community, to fight back, upset Powell most of all. While the New Left was capturing the imagination of university students and their professors, and then the nation's media, corporate leaders had remained largely silent and supine. Such complacency, Powell insisted, had to end. Business people and their allies had to be more outspoken, build organizations and campaigns to promote their values, and then vie for political power. This is I think there's something always really interesting when you look at the conservative right drifting into the far right in some places from the 60s and 70s onwards, how they had learned the mobilizing language of the left. Because the idea that you find a bunch of people that have the same class interests and get them to form organizations and then create political parties, well, that's essentially what Marx was saying about how you create working class movements that will advance their interests and eventually take political power. So there were people who were clear on the political right in America and the UK in the 60s and 70s, and probably now, that were studying what the left did and how the left thought. At first, Powell's memo circulated only privately amongst select members of the business community, but Powell could not keep it private once Richard Nixon nominated him in 1971 to the Supreme Court. Soon after, a Washington Post columnist shared the content of Powell's memo with his readers. Liberally minded Americans were incensed that a jurist who presented himself as a moderate in the Senate confirmation hearings had secretly issued such a radical call to arms. But the public release of Powell's memo was a gift to the neoliberal movement, for it served as a rallying point for the many business people, intellectuals, and would-be policymakers who wanted to restore free enterprise and free markets to the centre of American life. John M. Olin, a one-time chemical magnate who'd established the Olin Foundation in 1953, now redoubled the efforts through his foundation to mount ideological defences for free market capitalism. The Powell Memorandum, he wrote, gives reason for a well-organized effort to re-establish the validity and importance of the American free enterprise system. Joseph Coors Jr., part of the team of brothers who owned the Colorado-based Coors Brewery Company, was also inspired by the Powell Memo. In 1973, he, along with Paul Weyrich, founded the Heritage Foundation as a think tank charged with promoting free market principles and policies. Heritage quickly developed ties to Mont-Pelerin circles. The Mont-Pelerin Society was the original kind of neoliberal society founded in Switzerland, I think, in 1947. This kind of meeting of neoliberal economists and thinkers. Through Edwin Foylner, a Hayeckian acolyte, a Mont-Pelerin Society member, who would succeed Weyrich as Heritage president in 1977. Heritage established a reputation as the most politically aggressive think tank in the neoliberal firmament. A lot of the right-wing think tanks, things like the Heritage Foundation, combined two contradictory things. Not only did they have, and still do, an adherence to radical free market policies, which obviously transform society in all sorts of unexpected ways, but also the kind of reactionary, small c conservative, social conservatism. And the thing is, it's very hard to conserve society's institutions, marriage, families, sort of heterosexual life, all of this kind of stuff, or marginalize other social groupings, if also you're going to embrace the kinds of economic ideas that radically transform societies, split, move people around, create new social formations, all these kinds of things. The kind of things that conservative, small c conservative people generally really dislike. Another neoliberal and former Mont-Pelerin member, Murray Rothbard, was instrumental in founding the Charles Koch Foundation in 1974, soon to be rechristened the Cato Institute. Charles Koch was one of the four sons of Fred Koch, who had built his Kansas-based oil refining business, Koch Industries, into one of the country's largest and wealthiest corporate entities. Fred Koch was also a founding member of the John Birch Society and bequeathed an intensity of his right-wing political commitments to his sons. No think tank would outdo the Cato Institute in terms of hostility to the New Deal order, and the fierceness of its belief in libertarian principles. Yet another think tank, the Manhattan Institute, founded in 1977, began supporting the work of George Gilder, whose celebration of free market capitalism, Wealth and Poverty became one of the Bibles of the Reagan administration and the emerging neoliberal order on its publication in 1981. So you have these kind of these think tanks, these institutes for generating ideas that are generally in the service of the concentration of wealth and power, and where these ideas go is into the media. They are there is a kind of like a pipeline, normally kind of facilitated by that nice lunches and social events and that kind of thing. But there is a pipeline from these reactionary think tanks into mainstream media. So columnists and broadcasters then start articulating these ideas probably that they're not entirely unsympathetic towards, of, why don't we really begin to start limiting social welfare, because that would be good for everybody. Can't you see what social welfare has done to people, how it's kind of affected them and made them lazy and that sort of thing. And the way in which you change culture, this is a much more effective form of propaganda than anything that the Nazis attempted in their 12 years of power and the decade or so whilst they were trying to attain power. All the evidence suggests that by 1945, the people who had been kind of racists and anti-Semites still were, and the people who never really embraced those ideas and were in a kind of like a grey zone, much far more morally compromised by 1945, obviously, were still of that persuasion. And the small percentage of Germans that were actively and militantly against Nazism, those that hadn't been murdered, still had those values. And the process of school indoctrination, I think probably that was more effective. But overall, the way in which right-wing think tanks have operated in the Western world, and the longevity of them, and the set of social relationships that they are embedded in, and the effect on steering discourse, and the effect on creating almost hegemonic ideas in the minds of many, many people, has been one of the most effective propaganda feats in the world. One of the reasons why it's so effective is because it is largely invisible.
With McValue at McDonald's, you don't just get deals on the drinks. You get deals on McDonald's drinks. So when you're breaking a sweat, embrace the chill without breaking the bank. And when your crew is running on empty, keep your wallet full while refreshing the squad.
Grab a cold drink at a hot price, like a refreshing Coke Zero or sweet tea in any size for only $1.49. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
It's very, very easy to reject state propaganda. In fact, state propaganda itself is largely ineffective to most people, because most people can instantly see where it comes from. And then when you can see where an idea comes from, an automatic process of mental filtering happens. You either go, oh, yeah, I sort of believe in that anyway. Or, well, that's just the government saying it. They would say that. Whereas the journalist as independent arbiter of ideas, or the journalist as kind of navigator of ideas, or the journalist who is there to provide balance between 2 points of view, is a far more effective means of disseminating ideas, which will one day, during a period of crisis, create the means by which society can be transformed, and the period of social democracy that was the result of depression and world war can be unrolled. Most of the history of the last 50 years in Britain, America, and other neoliberal countries has been this story. It has been the history of what happens when social democracy is unraveled. And for the most part, it's resulted in periods of economic crisis, and it's resulted in ever greater levels of inequality and stagnation. So right-wing think tanks are not sort of neutral bit players in the history of Western societies. They are incredibly powerful and divisive organizations. Their funding is normally opaque. Go and try and find out who in Great Britain who funds the IEA. It's very, very difficult where they get their donations from. And the set of complicated relationships between the intellectual knowledge workers, the people generating new ideas, not that they're particularly sophisticated or clever ideas, but they're ideas nonetheless. The political class, and also a media class who is deeply embedded now and there's a kind of a revolving door between the two, so much so that you could say in Britain and America you both have media political classes. This set of relations is one of the key determinants of how Western society is currently developing, and a lot of a further part, adjunct to this story, is the transatlantic nature of think tank culture. You have various sort of failed British politicians. If you're in America and you're wondering what a Liz Truss or a Nigel Farage is, they are the kind of the Trumpists, Britain's Trumpists, and they occasionally turn up at CPAC and APAC and turn up at kind of various sort of fascistic American events to kind of bask in the reflected glory of the American right. And no doubt they, when that ship tanks, they will be the first to jump. But there are complicated transatlantic links. But there are also, in all fairness, there are all sorts of complicated transatlantic links between Britain's current Labour Party and the Democrats, and sometimes the Republicans too. So that's a story for another time. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting, and be careful what you read. It may have been written by a right-wing think tank somewhere. And I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. All the best. Bye-bye.
Business owners have to wear many hats, but mailing and shipping expert shouldn't have to be one of them. Hi, I'm Al Coe, CEO of Stamps.com, and that's exactly why we're in business. Small businesses are the lifeblood of our country, and it's an honor to lead the Stamps.com team that's focused on helping you thrive. We've helped over 4 million customers with a better way to manage mailing and shipping without having to waste time leaving the office. You can print stamps and shipping labels, manage tracking, and even schedule free carrier pickups, all from one simple dashboard. When you're running a business, every dollar counts and every second matters. That's why we're committed to delivering the best service, rates, and solutions for your small business. You give your best, and Stamps.com delivers the best in return. Go to Stamps.com to sign up for a special offer.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Lies, exploitation, and the American dream turned nightmare. This is Big Sugar, a deep dive into the inner workings of the sugar industry. I'm Celeste Headley, and in a new podcast, I'm investigating a true crime story like no other about the men who risked their lives to cut sugarcane. In Big Sugar from iHeartMedia, Imagine Audio, and the teams at Weekday Fun and Novel, I'll unravel a decades-long fight to get justice.
If they were right, then these workers were owed tens of millions of dollars in extra wages.
Listen to Big Sugar wherever you get your podcasts.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.